The Israeli Defense Forces are to tell us that, hey, don't worry, we've got 2 minutes of tape for you where the people on board are swinging clubs, etc. So they must be the aggressors. So they released those tapes. The American media, 100%, reeled them in. Super easy. They were ready to go anyway. And they bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. And they said, I saw Chris Matthews, and we're going to play a clip later in the program, where he says, I saw it with my own eyes. Those guys were swinging clubs. They're pro-Hamas supporters. No, they had it coming. So that worked perfectly, at least in America. Not in the rest of the world, but we bought into it. So come to find out, it turns out that might not be the real story, that might just be the Israeli version. Wow. The journalists here in America, that didn't occur to them, right? So now the witnesses on board and the journalists on board are coming out and speaking out as to what actually happened. Now, look, everybody's got their own perspective. So if you're a real news person, you should say, all right, look, this comes from this perspective and this comes from that. So here's the Israeli perspective. And you don't necessarily trust exactly what the people on board say because they've got their own, way. Even if they're not lying, they at least saw it from their version. And maybe their version isn't the correct version. But it's nice to hear the other side, right? So where are we going to hear that? On American television? That's a good one. No, of course not. No, Al Jazeera. So they're interviewing their reporter that was actually on board, Jamal El-Shayal, who's a British journalist, and he was on board, and we had seen him on some of the tapes before, and they're going to ask him excellent questions about what he saw. So let's watch that clip.
On board the Mavi Marmara, clearly there had been some altercation before you started to speak. What had you seen?
Well, David, the events of that evening unfolded quite unexpectedly for everyone. Initially at about 11 p.m. local time, the crew on board the ship spotted Israeli warships on either side of their own ship, as well as some sort of aircraft, which we later discovered to be a helicopter from a distance. So they gave an initial warning to passengers to put on their life vests and to ensure that everyone was taking some sort of safety precautions just in case something happened. That quickly developed into them being attacked by the Israeli army, or the Israeli Navy rather, roughly about 4 a.m. local time. This was despite the ship actually trying to move away from the Israelis, according to the captain. So as soon as this attack started, I was on the top deck, and within just a few minutes, there were live shots being fired from above the ship, from above, from where the helicopters
and these,
were.
Jamal, were the first shots that were fired, in your opinion?
No, the first shots that were fired were either some sort of sound grenades. There was some tear gas that was fired, as well as rubber-coated steel bullets. They were fired initially, and the live bullets came roughly about 5 minutes after that, after those initial shots were fired.
Let's try and establish who was doing the firing. Was it coming from the air or from the sea, from what you could ascertain?
There was actually, it was evident there was definitely fire from the air, because one of the people who was killed was clearly shot from above. He was shot the bullet targeted him at the top of his head. There was also fire coming from the sea as well. Most of the fire initially from the sea was tear gas canisters, sound grenades, but then it became live fire. After I finished filing that last report and I was going down below deck, one of the passengers who was on the side of the deck holding a water hose, trying to hose off, if you will, the advancing Israeli Navy, was shot in his arm by soldiers in the boats below.
I want to ask you about a sequence of events, because we've heard from the Israelis on a number of occasions that they did not fire live ammunition until the weapons of 2 Israeli soldiers were taken away on board. In other words, it couldn't have happened until Israeli soldiers themselves were on the Mavi Marmara. That's what they say.
No, there's no doubt from what I saw that live ammunition was fired before any Israeli soldier was on deck. What I saw, the sequence of events that took place was that there was a pool camera, so reporters took it in turns to file. So after I had done my first file, I turned around to see what was going on, and there were several shots fired. In fact, one of the helicopters at the front of the ship, you could almost see the soldiers pointing their guns down through some sort of hole or compartment at the bottom side of the helicopter and firing almost indiscriminately without even looking where they were firing. And those bullets were definitely live bullets.
We saw you there.
All right. Now, look, there's a lot of twists and turns here. Later in the interview, he explained, no, yes, there were passengers on board when the commandos were landing that decided to fight back, and they had rods with them, and they did throw somebody over the side of a ship. Besides, we saw that. But that journalist right there had not seen any of the video that the IDF had released. They were interviewing him right after he's come back, basically. So he independently confirmed some of the things that we already saw in the video. And he said he didn't see any knives. That doesn't mean there weren't any, but he didn't see any. And he said, and it was an interesting thing, as you noticed there, first it was non-live fire, and they could distinguish that it was rubber bullets, well, at least steel bullets covered in rubber, and it was non-live fire, but then they switched to live fire, and he saw people getting shot. Now, he's not the only one. They have now talked to a number of people who were on board, and they're all reporting the same thing. Now, look, the other side will say, oh, I bet they all got together and made up a story. Okay, well, let's see the tapes, because the Israeli Defense Forces have the tapes, and they won't release them. Gee, I wonder why, right? Now, many of the other passengers and the journalists on board say, in particular, another photographer, journalist, Cevdet Kılıçlar, that guy happens to be Turkish, was taking a picture of the commandos landing when he was shot through the skull. Several independent confirmation of that event, and he is dead, and he has been shot in the skull, and he was apparently shot again at close range. So now that's all before they landed or as they're landing. So according to their accounts, that would make it significantly different than the Israeli Defense Forces account, which says, oh, we just were going by in a helicopter and we decided to rappel down, and all of a sudden these animals attacked us, right? Yeah, that's a little different story. So apparently, they say that there were about 20 passengers on board fighting back, and remember, there were over 600 passengers and journalists on the boat overall. The 20 fighting on board, and as I originally suspected and said on the program, I said they are very likely to be Turks, because they were all different nationalities on that board. But I know my folks, and they're the ones that are likely to get involved in that fight. Okay. Now, for better or for worse, and it certainly turned out to be for worse. But you think, hey, it's self-defense. It's not self-defense, depending on who shot first. Well, now you at least have both accounts. Now, there's an Israeli journalist and blogger by the name of Noam Shazayev, and he makes an excellent case about who should do the investigation here. He says, quote, Israel has confiscated some of the most important material for the investigation, namely the films, audio, and photos taken by the passengers and journalists on board, and the Mavi Marmara's security cameras, which I had not considered before. That's another excellent point. All of those captured a lot of footage. Since yesterday, he goes on, Israel has been editing these films and using them for its own PR campaign. In other words, Israel has already confiscated most of the evidence, held it from the world, and tampered with it. No court in the world would trust it to be the one examining it. That's exactly right, okay? And by the way, some of the toughest reporting on this is coming out of Israel. Haaretz newspaper, this gentleman, and some of the others, much tougher than the U.S. reporting.